right, continuing. Unconditional love is bandied about a great deal, and it does not exist in practical terms. There is a continuum of conditionality and unconditionality, but let's take the most common application of unconditional love, which is I love you unconditionally. Well, do you love everyone else unconditionally? Because if not, it's a pretty big condition that I only love you. One out of what? We've excluded, more than 7 billion people. They're not loved. So you're loved on the condition that you're not this person, this person, this person, this person, this person. Are you loved on the condition that you are physical? What about all the consciousness that isn't physical, that you're not conscious of? Do you love the parts of me that you don't know? Like I slept with your best friend, but you don't know about that. Because, well, there again, if it's unconditional, then you're dealing with something that's, no matter when it happens, no matter if it's physical or not physical, no matter if it's you or anyone else, I love you. Well, then you say, okay, so what does that mean exactly? So we've just clarified that unconditional means it has to be at any time to everyone, physical and non-physical, of all natures, conscious and unconscious. Okay. So that's that part of the equation, which generally does not apply because it's usually bestowed as this great accolade. I don't love that person unconditionally. I love you unconditionally. So then what is love? Now, here you get into the confusion of the various maturity levels and natures of love. Well, I love you unconditionally, meaning I want to fuck you unconditionally. Well, do you want to fuck everyone unconditionally? Because, there's a lot of other people that you could be loving like that. So no, I idolize you. Okay, so we're already, it's like you have to have this type of body and not that type. And so is it referring to lust? Or is it referring to need? I need you. You're my idol. You're my ideal. Because, the reason that's important to clarify is that the other person is not likely to feel loved if they're trying to get through their day and you're trying to seduce them. So whose love are we talking about? The love that the other person feels based on your impact, or the love that you are asserting in language that is so irritating to the other person? And then what about need? Well, I need you. Okay. Does the other person want to be needed? Is that their definition of what love is, to be needed? So we have lust, we have need, romance and attachment. You have respect. I respect, you embody my ideals. You often have famous people, for example, getting quite bitter about that, as people put them up on a pedestal and they don't actually feel like they can be seen in their own terms. So a really big distinction with love is it the kind of thing that makes the other person feel loved? And then what is that? Is it a good feeling? So if we start with this crude an analysis of love as, is it a good feeling? Is what makes you feel good, seducing this, that, and the other, making the other person feel terrible? If there's a split, whose feeling matters? If you're feeling great so that the other person feels terrible, is unconditional love something to be aspired to, even if it was possible? Now, if it what makes the other person feel great, what do you do about the fact that some people feel great as you put them down? For example, I had a girlfriend who laughed, gave me more time, gave me more compliments, and gave me more sex if I would make put-down remarks about her. So she was clearly happy when I was putting her down. I wasn't happy about it, and I noticed that I was being, more I was being more verbally unkind to her than anyone else in my life. And I wondered why. Well, the answer was clear. I wanted laughter, praise, sex, and her time, and her smile. While she gave it all in profusion when I put her down, she withheld it when I didn't. And so she was, in effect, training me to do something that was comfortable for her as an abused child. And she was making me feel loved with laughter, praise, sex, a time, and smiling. She was making me feel good if I would say things that were bad about her. The only thing is, I didn't feel good about saying those things. And in the arena of humor, it was a little bit in that, drifting towards the cruelest side of sarcastic humor. She seemed to find that very comfortable, but I found it uncomfortable. So whose love are we talking about? In other words, if it makes someone happy to take a whip to them, so you say, okay, love is making the other person happy, and you start beating them. Does it matter the fact that you don't enjoy beating them at all? Is it just about what the other person feels? So we're lacking, a clear construct of love. And one of the things that we could look at is Abraham Maslow's work on the hierarchy of human needs. That every human being needs to survive, every human being needs to feel secure in that survival. They need to have a sense of love and belonging, a sense of self-esteem, and they need to start developing their potential, and ultimately they need to transcend themselves. They need to give back to something bigger than themselves. So if this is a hierarchy of human needs, could we say objectively, regardless of feelings, that when I behave in such a way that increases your survival, that increases your security, your safety, that increases your sense of love and belonging as you experience that, and gives you a sense of self-esteem and dignity, that behavior is loving behavior, whether you want to fuck me or not, whether you want to do any number of other things, whether you need me or not, that it's a behavior, a disciplined behavior with a specific intent, referencing data, referencing the fact that, my loving behavior has actually ensured that you have a safe place to sleep more than you did last month. Is it a behavior or is it a feeling? So we don't go into any of that, but one of the biggest jokes in my experience of the whole, absurdity around unconditional love was when I was given a questionnaire by a group that I was applying to be membership in. And it's called Sacred Connections. And they said, how do you feel about unconditional love? And I shared kind of a little bit of what I shared here. And I was rejected. And so, apparently my answer about unconditional love was not worthy of being unconditionally loved, which kind of defeats the point if there's all these people who aren't loving good enough for your unconditional love. So you have a little bit of a tension there. Another thing you'll find a lot, or I've heard a lot, is don't judge. And this needs to be broken down, because what is a judgment? It's an assessment. Now, for me to write, I've got to judge the distance between my hand, a chalk. I've got to judge how far away to be here. So our entire relationship with the entire world is based on judging things, judging the distance of things, judging the width of things, judging the weight of things, judging how much money we have in the bank. So it's a constant assessment. So that's our physical reality. So then people say, well, no, it's not about, assessing what's happening. It's about having a moral opinion about what's happening, to say this is better than that, or this person is better than that person. And again, if we say, for example, that this person has more money than this person, and in the metric of attractiveness, symmetry is one of the things that time and time again, if you ask people what a beautiful face looks like, they pick the symmetrical face. So could you say that this face is more or less symmetrical than this other face? And you say, okay, well, that's, again, cosmetic things. The real thing you have to get away from is the idea that this person is better than that person. And then you go into, okay, well, on what metric? So this person can run a 4-minute mile. This person can't get out of bed. So is this person better at running than the other person? I mean, is that useful to know if you're going to give an Olympic torch to someone, that you actually want to know that this person is faster than this person, so they're better at running? This person is better at making money. This person is better at spending money. This person is better at running. This person is better at swimming. This person is better at cooking. Well, then you have certainly, obviously, subjectivity when it comes to taste. Because, well, what about that cooking one? Well, I don't like Chinese food. So, you can't say that, that food is better just because it's made with a more traditional recipe. And who said traditional is better? So then you get into not so much that there's better or worse, but who's deciding. And so then you take that down to a micro level of analysis, for example, with food, and you say, well, you can't say that food is objectively better. But then you do a profile of your own taste, and you look at the specific textures that you like, and now you can say this food is better or worse on that texture metric. And then you look at the specific flavors and the specific intensities and the specific quantities that you like. Well, once you have a profile of what you like in the diet arena, now you can accurately measure what is and is not objectively better based on that profile, so that anyone who likes those kinds of textures won't like this food, and anyone who does will. And it's no longer personal. It's just, I like these things. And the same with beauty. So obviously, any specific thing can be measured in any specific area. You take these two hands. One of them is closer, and one of them is further away than the blackboard. Well, you flip the thing and say, well, one of them is closer to the camera, and one of them is further away, because it's relative to the value. Now, you can say, is it useful to have a relative relationship with all these values? Well, it is if you like strawberry ice cream and you're given raspberry ice cream instead and told it's close enough, it's a berry, it's relevant to you that there's a distinction between this red berry and another red berry. To someone who doesn't like berries at all and just likes chocolate, it's kind of a meaningless point. So the reason we judge is because it provides enormous value. So is there any area that judgment is not useful? Well, one of the areas that judgment tends to damage human relationships is in the presumption that my value hierarchy is absolutely better than another person's value hierarchy. You take, for example, cheating, and you have, a situation where obviously everyone values honesty. Even crooks get furious when another crook lies to them. How could you lie to me? Everyone values honesty. But the question is, in what case does in what situations is honesty more valued higher than, for example, sex? So you've got a cheating situation. Whenever cheating occurs, one person values sex more than honesty in that situation. And obviously the person who's being cheated on, they may do as well. They may have valued sex more than telling their partner the truth, but obviously they value someone else telling them the truth more than they value the other person's pleasure. They didn't get any of the pleasure, they got all the pain. So, when it's flipped, but let's say you have one partner in a couple that says, I'm never going to lie to my partner, however pleasurable it could be to do so. I'm not going to. And another partner that says, I am going to lie to my partner when it's really pleasurable to do so. Of course, we both value honesty. Of course, we both value pleasure. But I'm going to value honesty ahead of pleasure, and you're going to value pleasure ahead of honesty. Well, when that emerges, when that becomes transparent, you usually dissolve the couplehood because it doesn't feel good for one person to do all the sacrificing when the other person is not. It may be fine for two people who value pleasure above honesty, and they regularly cheat on each other and don't mind because they understand it. It's like, sure, I put pleasure ahead of honesty too. It was a really great moment. If you had been there, I'm sure you would have done the same. It was a great experience, and that's fine with me. And the other person says, yeah, I don't like it, but I get it, So what tends to be dangerous is in a situation like that, trying to say, that there's never a situation where I would ever do any of that. And this is particularly destructive when you have, for example, someone with a different economic background, a different educational background, a different cultural background, a different set of experiences, a different physiology, because maybe the reason you're so virtuous is your penis is numb. Your penis is numb. This happened to me where, I noticed that the pleasure in my penis went down by about 30%. And I masturbated less. And I was less interested in sex after that occurred. Now, what if it just means that some person has low nerve sensitivity in their body, that the pleasure that we all have of being honest and in integrity with ourselves, for someone who has low penis sensation is just way higher. Or whether maybe it means that we've had more time to cultivate a moral framework, or maybe it means, for example, I was lied to as a child, and so I was really clear that I hated being lied to, which naturally led to then I don't want to lie to other people, and so I've never lied to a friend or a lover. And so maybe it's something like that. And maybe if that other person had had that same experience of really understanding how painful it is to be repeatedly lied to and then lied to about lying, that they would understand how damaging that is. So it tends to be destructive to a relationship to take a superior position that is based on the supposition that the innate part of us as a human being is innately better than the innate part of another human being. It doesn't tend to be the case. It's much more likely that we would be in alignment with what the majority are doing in that kind of situation. And it precludes understanding. But it also makes people feel better to have these kinds of superiority judgments, at least the people having them. And so even then, at some point, can you say, well, I don't judge people like that, and so I'm better than. So that tends to be the area that at least destroys relationships, but in a really relativistic sense. How many good relationships can you have? If you've got 2,000 Facebook friends, maybe you should destroy 99% of those so that you can actually spend time with a few people you actually get to know, see, and can be cared about and care for. But judgment is definitely something to look at in a nuanced way. And again, particularly, if everyone at the table values a healthy body and says so, then you want to look critically on the fact that someone is getting to weigh 400 pounds. Because if you don't, it doesn't create the friction needed to understand what's going on. For example, incest is correlated with obesity. And if nobody's talking about that, then it may not lead to that deeper awareness. Or if someone is terrified of being raped, again, another reason to cause incest. If it's in a woman, not wanting the sexual attention, if that doesn't get dealt with, then that person may have a shorter life for no other reason than that the group at the table was so busy making sure they weren't going to judge that they won't say, gee, you're eating yourself into disease. There's got to be a good reason for that. Let's really go into this, as opposed to just say, I would never do that. Maybe you'd be doing it more than they would if you had been raped 3 or 4 times. Or if your parents had told you what a shit you were constantly and you're trying to numb that pain, and the only thing you could do at 6-year-old with no parents was to eat more. So a few thoughts on that. Self-importance, I've had that thrown at me, a fair amount. And one thing to be aware of is that as a consciousness, we're always seeking healing. And so, for example, the most self-important people usually feel very valueless in some area of their life. Otherwise, they don't waste all this energy pursuing, for example, trying to look important. And so if you have a big area of your childhood, for example, where, let's say, you have completely narcissistic and self-absorbed parents, and you're trying to feel like you have some basis to exist, but you never do. They cheat on you, they lie to you, they do this, they do that, and you always feel like I have no value. Self-importance, for example, is the medicine for that felt experience. And when that doesn't get processed and sorted out, then the identity of the child, moves, and you're no longer necessarily around narcissistic people, or as many of them. And then, there's so many things that get fixated at a young age because they don't get talked about and integrated. And you don't understand it. You don't understand the amount of grieving and healing that is necessary to love that inner child from that degree of neglect, because it was denied that there was any neglect to protect the parent, because the parent wanted to feel good about themselves, so they called all that neglect love, which is a very common abusive trait. You hurt someone, you feel a bit bad about it, so rather than apologizing, you say, well, that was to love you and for your own good, and you just make up a story around that. You confuse the child about what love is. You create the phenomena where you tell someone you love them and they run like hell. And so, if someone is feeling or seeking importance, one of the ways to respond to it is not attacking them and saying, stop seeking importance. One way to respond to it would be to do quite the opposite, to actually invite them to go deeper down, to invite them into the center of the circle, to invite them to go into a time in their life when they felt incredibly small, and focus full attention and value and affirmation on that smallest part that felt completely invisible. And when that part gets the medicine of true focus, then the adult stops clamoring for constant attention in a way that never satisfies the issue, because it isn't the adult that's being ignored. It's the child that's being ignored in a suppressed dynamic. Now, one of the other things that's thrown around a lot is selfishness is considered a curse. What a selfish person. Now, the reality is that the most selfish thing that you and I can do is to create a world around us of profoundly happy people. Why? Because if you are surrounded by profoundly happy people, you are going to be happier, 80% easier, than if you're surrounded by miserable people in scarcity and trauma. Now, the most selfish thing that you can do is to create a pristine environment with magnificent soundscapes, warmthscapes, foodscapes, where all of the senses are in balance, in vitality, growing, learning, beauty, and where everywhere you look, you see abundance, happiness, abundance, joy. This is the most selfish thing you can possibly do, to be surrounded by highly sexual, magnificent, smart people. Now, when people are behaving in a way that destroys the environment, their lives, their relationships, their children's lives, they are being profoundly self-negating. And so what we need is a lot more selfishness. But if you understand what selfishness is, that it is setting up an environment in which the self celebrates and blossoms with as much well-being as possible, then you also understand that to be completely selfless is the same as being completely selfish. Because if my biggest dream is for everyone around me to be healthy and happy and alive and abundant and rich in a magnificently smelling and tasting and sensuous environment, then what's the difference between wanting to give the greatest gift that anyone could give to the entire planet and being completely selfish? There's no difference. We are part of the same organism. You don't get to drive out with your Rolls Royce of your gated community and be truly happy and feel safe driving through slums and getting diseases and being scared of being robbed. That's a miserable life. What we call highly selfish people are some of the most lonely, unhappy, overworked, addictive, miserable people on the planet. They're not being selfish. They're being stupid, going back to that sense of the culture defines what the norm is. It doesn't define what intelligence is. So our culture, as a materialistic culture, has said, get rich and buy things, and that's a good thing. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. It doesn't mean it's intelligent. It just means that's what our culture says. And so our rich people went along with the cult. Now, some of them, transcend that, like Elon Musk, trying to make a big difference in the planet and are doing amazing things. But they're doing that amazing things by ignoring the cultural stereotype. If you read the book about Elon Musk, you discover all of his friends resisted his idea to start SpaceX. They all said he would lose all his money. It was a terrible idea. He would fail. Don't do it. Well, he did it because he wanted to provide an interplanetary species dynamic for all of us. And so his life grew as opposed to just getting fat in an island somewhere. So selfishness and selflessness are the same thing. Self-hatred and hatred of everyone else is also the same thing. So what we're really looking for is the pivot from self-hatred, failing to do the things that would really help us to grow and become our best. And in doing so, participating in a more mediocre environment that everyone else has to live in. We have trust. And you have the phenomenon of people saying, trust me, or in New Age circles, you must learn to trust yourself, or trust the universe, or whatever it is. You've got to learn trust. And the supposition is that the more you rely on, it's often an underlying framework of it's all working out for the best, for example. So, for example, you see your employee doing what seems to be stealing out of the till, and you want to confront them and you're angry, and some New Age friend says, well, it's you've got to learn to trust. You can't, maybe he was going to borrow it and take it back, and maybe this, and so, you've got to trust more. Things are all working out for the best. And then it's like, no, I'm losing money, And so you have this basic, sense that somehow it's more advanced to trust, that something is going to be a certain way regardless of the data. And I would say it's quite the opposite. That if you trust reality, then you understand things like momentum. Momentum is part of reality. If I'm moving a sledgehammer that weighs 40 pounds and I'm moving it fast, momentum says that unless a very strong force equal or greater occurs, that sledgehammer is going to crash into this phone and this video experience is going to be over. And so if I trust reality to work like reality works, then when I see someone stealing money out of the till, the data suggests that thieves or criminals statistically become more and more bold unless they are stopped. So if you trust reality, you will, and you don't want to have all of your money stolen, you will stop that right at that point. Police call it the broken window effect, where if a police will patrol a street and look after anyone to find out who broke a window and repair it, that neighborhood doesn't deteriorate into more and more serious crime. But if the data suggests that you do nothing and you say, oh, we don't care, then the message is, this is not a valuable town, so nobody's going to bother if we do all kinds of things. And then the boundary seeking escalates, particularly with young men seeking some sense of boundary. They just try a thing. What if I burn down a house? Does anyone care about that? And if no one does anything about that, then let's start doing this and doing that. Maybe we have to shoot a cop before anyone cares. And of course people care, and then that's the point where it stops. So if you trust something, trust is intricately connected with seeing. And if you see clearly, you will see that every human being has the probability of doing evil, and every human being has the probability of doing good. And you will also see that certain environments make it easier and easier for someone to do good. For example, surveillance. People very rarely steal Lamborghinis, even with keys in them, in Dubai, because there are cameras watching every street corner with facial recognition. So people leave the keys of Lamborghinis in the car on the street in Dubai, but not in Harlem, because there aren't the cameras. And there isn't that cultural framework of being, very clear that we don't have crime in this country. So trust is a lot about seeing. And when someone tells me, as I've had various women tell me, Dane, I trust you completely. I think this is profoundly dangerous. Now, they would get high ranks in the spiritual bigotry that says, being more trusting is good. But my response is to make it more nuanced. And this is, I think, a very important thing to be aware of. Do you trust the Dalai Lama completely? In what area? As a brain surgeon, would you let the Dalai Lama do your brain surgery? Would you let him manufacture sodium chloride? You'd have to see a little bit more detail. Does he have any experience in that? Would you trust him to babysit a 2-year-old? Well, has he ever done that before? Does he know how to make their milk? So trust has enormous amount to do with respect, which is to see and to see clearly who you're dealing with at all levels. And that's the key. So when someone says they trust me completely, I try and bring that into focus. And I say, okay, so let's look at what you're trusting. Do you trust that this relationship would last forever? Let's say it's a lover relationship. Do you trust that I would ever hurt you? Well, all of my lover relationships so far have ended. So, we've got 90% to 1 ratio. So that's not a very good thing to trust if you're expecting suddenly that pattern to change and you don't even know why it's there. Why would it change? What's the basis of that trust? Or, in some other area, what's the basis for assuming that? Because I don't intend to hurt anyone. But let's look. This friend was hurt when I did this, and this friend was hurt when I did this. So why do you think it would be different from you? Are you going to do something different that none of my other friends have done that are going to ensure that I never hurt you? And if so, what is that? What's that trust based on? And often, when I hear people saying they trust me completely, what they're really saying is they don't want to think, they don't want to see clearly. Now, there are larger senses of trust that you can trust in independent of the small things. You can trust in certain paradigms. For example, you can say that over time people will learn from pain, so that pain will be the teacher of the thing that eliminates pain. And that can be true. And if you see that happening, that's a reasonable thing to trust in. For example, in my family generation, my grandparents abused my parents a lot more than my parents abused me. And I'm abusing my wife a lot less than my father abused my mother. So there is a 30 to 50% reduction of an intergenerational abuse system. Then you can look at why. Well, I did $150,000 of therapy. I did lots of healing work. I wrote books about relationships. I watched 1,000 hours of media and stuff to learn about those dynamics. And then you say, okay, well, I did all that, and my parents, my mother lied to me a lot. I'd never lie. Oh, that's okay. So that's a good shift. My father always denied responsibility and made other people feel like idiots. I take a lot of responsibility. So then you can say, okay, huge shift there in intergenerational abuse. But then you say things like, well, my father was very impatient and critical, and I'm very impatient and critical, so very little change at all. And so you have to take a nuanced approach to look at what is and is not changing with time. This also brings up another issue, which is the nobility of moving on. I'm okay. I don't need anything. Let's move on. This is a very popular direction within particularly a chauvinistic culture, because what we're usually talking about is moving on without the nuanced analysis of all the feelings. And usually the person who can be funny, witty, move on, and not make people confront their own impact and feelings will be a very popular person. So it's a great survival strategy in America, as an example. But let's go back to positivity. In my teens, when I read Norman Vincent Peale's Success with a Positive Mental Attitude and started being very positive and looking at the bright side, I'd left my, family dynamic in all of its abuse. I was starting my own business, so there was a lot, to focus on the positive. But then come, 38, 40 years old, and all of the abuse trauma that I was so positively keen to push down is all coming up. All the feelings of wanting to die are emerging again, meaning the positivity didn't do anything about them. It just turned my attention. It's very much like you're standing on the top of a garbage heap. And on the one hand, you see all the garbage. And on the other hand, you see the forest where you didn't make a dump. Because that's what we do in the West, is one person is going to generate 102 tons of garbage. So where's that going to go? Well, we dig big holes in the ground and we stick it in there. So you're standing on the edge of a garbage heap. And you're looking at the garbage heap and you're saying, this is terrible. Something has got to be done. And your New Age friend comes along and says, well, look on the bright side. Turn around away from the garbage field and look at this beautiful forest. You turn around, you say, you're right. I shouldn't dwell on the negative. In fact, what am I doing thinking about this garbage pile? I'm going to walk away from this garbage pile into the forest, and then bingo! Birds are singing. It's like, see, you've got to be positive. Think on the bright side, and don't go back there to the garbage heap. So you go away into the forest for 20 years and 30 years. And then one day you come back into the domain of the garbage pile. And it's bigger by a factor of 10 than it's ever been before, because you and everyone else has been filling it up with more garbage. Why? Because you were being so positive as to not to look at it. And so it's gotten bigger because you were so positive. Meaning, when you're positive, oh, well, it'll all work out for the universe's best. Well, who's going to institute recycling programs when you're too positive like that? And there's actually been an interesting study there's 4 different personality types. There is the destructive optimist. The destructive optimist says, it's all going to work out well, so why should I bother doing anything? Then there's the destructive pessimist. The destructive pessimist says, it's all going to be terrible, so why should I do anything? The world's going to come to an end, why bother? The world is going to be fantastic, why bother? So we've got destructive optimism and destructive pessimism. Then we have constructive optimists. Constructive optimists are the people that say, the world is great and I want to be a part of it, so I'm going to work to make sure that it is great. That's called constructive because they're actually doing something to make a better world. And then there's the constructive pessimist. The constructive pessimist says, things are bad and they're going to get worse. So I'm going to work my ass off to see that they don't get as worse as they could be. And it turns out that the constructive pessimist has more positive impact at creating a better world than all 4 of the groups, because they work the hardest and it's action that counts. Meaning a constructive optimist would look at a dump and say, I don't know, I'm sure this is part of the universe's plan, that there's 102 metric tons of garbage coming in per individual over the course of a lifetime. So I'm going to do nothing. And the constructive pessimist looks at the garbage pile and says, well, I'm sure that everything's going to be terrible no matter what I do, so I'm going to do nothing. And the garbage gets bigger in both cases. But the positive the constructive positive person, says, there is a plan, things are going great, and I'm going to make sure that I'm the one that makes them go great. And so I'm going to start a recycling pile here, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to develop a technology that eats plastic and turns it into energy, and this and that and the other. And the destructive, the constructive pessimist says, this is terrible, and I'm sure there's going to be even more garbage in the world when I die than when I'm here now at the rate things are going. This is not good. So this urgently needs all of our attention, and I'm going to work my ass off. Bill Gates falls into the category of a constructive pessimist. If you read the biographies, you'll find he's constantly worrying about the complete end of Microsoft. And it's his worrying, and more importantly, all the things he does to, for example, create $30 billion of cash in the bank. That is a defensive strategy against all the fears of chaos and mistakes and stuff that destroy many companies. So the move on approach is that, well, you've looked at the garbage dump long enough, let's move on. We've talked enough about garbage, let's move on. The problem with that is unless you've taken the time to actually solve the issue, moving on doesn't change the issue. It just means you're not dealing with it, so somebody else needs to. And so there's a very dark side to let's move on. When you're a sexual abuse survivor and you don't do anything, you move on. You leave your predator to hunt the next person because the predator learned from you that it was okay. And it might take 3 years for you to sort that out so that that doesn't happen to the next person. It might take 3 years. But it doesn't mean that, the next person is any better unless you took that action. So moving on, a very popular message of you're better if you can let it go, just let it go, often leads to intergenerational abuse system. It's like you let go your parents' abuse, then you let go your own abuse, then your child lets go your abuse, and then it just continues on. Now, go for your dreams. I would bring it back to trust and respect and intimacy. It's very important to build a relationship between the dream and the reality that you're in. Now, it's also a tricky one because there is grace and there is luck and all of that. And a lot of the people who achieve their dreams do so on that basis. I think many celebrities will just say, like Harrison Ford. He was a carpenter who happened to be around when Star Wars was being shot. If he hadn't happened to do that, no Harrison Ford. It's pure luck. You want to be aware of the probability field that you're dealing with back into that support thing, because you don't want to tell your children there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that kind of lucky thing would happen to you. So just wait around and maybe you'll be the one, and otherwise your life is screwed. You want to, basically you want to be very deeply involved, creating luck, analyzing the dream, participating, having backup plans, having multiple different dreams. It's a lot of this is just go into it deeper. Go into it deeper and always ask yourself, what would I advise for my best friend? Now, and then from what metric? Being an attorney, you are more likely to be depressed. than almost any other field. So, is money worth being depressed? Go into the details, look at the data. So, next thing you have is a phenomena that I encounter where this is basically what happens. And I'll talk about it in my own terms. So a woman has some bad experiences with men. So she decides to go find herself, and as part of that, starts meditating and, basically retreats from relationship for X number of decades. And that's just what she does. And so you have this kind of this ecology of personas that develop in, like, for example, you have to engage a little bit. You have to go shopping in America. You have to go for a walk and say hello to people. But none of those personas are going to touch, for example, a sexual wound or a defense pattern, because there's nothing being challenged. So I would meet these women who would come to me and say, I've been doing so much meditating on my own for 10 years that I'm sure all of my relationship problems are over. And I had never found that to be the case. And so I would ignore that and I would say, okay, tell me what you were dealing with 10 years ago. And they're very reluctant to do this. Like, oh, that's in the past. It's not me. It's like, nevertheless, you at least have the memory. So what was going on? And do you know why it went on then? And often they haven't examined why. So they have no idea of their part in that pattern. And typically, within a few weeks of intense relating, those patterns start emerging as probabilities or actualities in our relationship. And they're always so shocked because they didn't have to deal with those patterns as long as they were out of any intimate relationship, because shopping doesn't bring them up. And the point is a little bit like walking away from the dump. You're looking at the dump, it's horrifying. You walk away, the smell fades. You don't look at it anymore and you say, oh, that was easy. No, when you walk back to the dump, it's even worse because you didn't learn anything, you didn't do anything differently, you still created garbage. That's the kind of thing that tends to happen when people have such horrible relationships. Because who has great, fabulous, rewarding, high-growth relationships and says, I think I'm going to take a break from relationship? No, it's people who first they're stolen from, then they're manipulated, then they feel horrible. Those people, of course, want to take a break from relationship because they're so miserable. Well, who doesn't learn how to turn a miserable relationship into something good? The people who are taking a break. So there's an underlying physics of that, which says you don't get to clean up the garbage pile while you're away from the garbage. So wherever you've taken a break from, your family, your dating men, working in an office, whatever it is, traditionally that will not have changed unless you dealt with it head on with your pattern of choosing partners. Well, if you go back to the trust thing, when people start with, oh, I trust you, that's not about me because they don't know anything about me at that point. That's about their pattern of giving their power to other people. Well, that doesn't work very well. And so it has nothing to do with me that, a month later, that type of profile is going to flip from saying, I trusted you, and then you didn't do all those things that I projected and assumed that you would do, and then you didn't do them. And I projected and assumed that you would do them without checking with you or without learning anything about you and without telling you anything about me. And so that just doesn't lead to any transformation. It leads to an inappropriate trust and followed by an inappropriate blame, neither of which shifts the dynamic. we have the the spiritual bigotry against materialism. And particularly in Buddhist philosophies, there's this big focus on being able to accept things. Now, I do the exact opposite in my own life. For example, when I got very depressed by the low response rate online with American women, I took a tour of the globe. And Danish women respond 3 times more than American women. I'm the same me. Italian women respond twice as much and are more softer in many ways. Thai women respond 5 times more than American women, and Filipino women respond 10 times as more than American women, if not more. It's actually probably close to 20. So this is not being equanimity, developing the peace of mind to sit here being rejected by, 100 women after 100 women for doing this and that and the other, and feeling great about it, like I release all the misery. No, I'm getting up and doing something. So I do my global search. I discover that there's a whole country where it's 20 times easier to actually have a conversation. Amazing. And in Thailand, it's 10 times easier to spend quality time with a man or a woman spontaneously. This can be tourists. This can be Thai women, Thai men. Doesn't matter if it's romantic or not. It's 10 times easier. And so my response is go to Thailand because I like quality, spontaneous time. And screw the idea that when I really want spontaneous quality time, that I should sit here telling myself to stop being irritated by the fact that I'm not getting any of it in the United States. When you got a whole country colluding to be as busy as possible, with as many plans as possible, booked as far in advance as possible, and what you want is spontaneous, relaxed, quality time. Get the fuck out of there. Go to a place where it's in abundance. And and this ties in with the bigotry around materialism, because it's all material. To act on that time, like, look at all the materialism here. So first of all, I've spent 25 years growing a business that allows me to make hundreds of dollars per hour. So that means, and I've secondly kept the business small so that it doesn't tie me down. And then thirdly, I've built up savings. These are all materialist things that allow me to take off. And then fourthly, I went around the globe flying all over the place. That's a materialistic act. And then fifthly, I've settled on Thailand. And then I visited all the places in Thailand, and I settled on the Nai Harn beach area of Phuket. And then I looked at all the apartments in the areas and got my favorite apartment with my best view of the Big Buddha. That's materialistic. And then I checked in, and found these friends and this friend. And then I checked more than 30 masseuses and masseurs in the area to find the 3 favorite masseuses and masseurs for a deep healing, energetic experience. And then I trained them, all materialistic, to do my style even better. And then I checked out all my favorite restaurants and found my 3 favorite restaurants. And this whole thing is a materialistic process. And then I took 6 months of the year off work to go live there on a regular basis. And then I found my best airline for this policy and this policy. The whole thing is materialist. And then at the end of that, I'm very happy. At the end of that, I'm very, very happy. And I'm not controlling my temper. I'm putting myself in an environment in which I wake up and I think this is a great environment. I'm so delighted to be here, and I'm so grateful that I put myself here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the Thai people. Thank you to, I have my favorite taxi who I enjoy joking with. I get to joke for a whole hour every time I fly into Phuket because we have a unique chemistry around humor. I don't have that chemistry in America with a single taxi driver, let alone if they'd come up the same way. So there's so many things that go along with that. And the idea that this is all materialistic, it's far more spiritual to sit and meditate about the misery of the United States and be happy about it, it goes back to that value hierarchy. It's far more easy for me to make 10 grand and head off to Thailand than it is for me to sit here and say, what the fuck am I doing in a country where every time I call someone up, they're like, talk to me next week. I don't want to talk to you next week. I want to talk to a human being now. And I get how unpopular that is here, but wait a minute, there's another place halfway around the world where that's a very popular thing to do. You call up and you say, how's it going? And they'll sit and talk to you for 5 or 10 hours. Well, that's a lot of fun. And it's win-win. They laugh, they enjoy, it's a delightful experience. So we move on to need. It's very unpopular in the United States to have needs. Don't be needy is one of the biggest things you can do to shame, a man in the United States. Same with women, though, I should say. I've had women constantly apologizing to me in the United States for being needy. I'm so needy. Oh, I'm terrified. I do apologize. Now, the truth is, we have needs. Surprise, surprise. If you shut off your oxygen, you're going to be dead. If you shut off your food, you're going to be dead. Now, the best way to feel needy is to shut off your oxygen. Just shut off your oxygen or go up to someone and smother them and wait and see how long it takes them to start flailing around and desperately trying to get oxygen at all costs, even if they have to kill you. So if you want to know how to make someone needy, just take something that we need and deprive them of it. Now, Abraham Maslow has done the work to suggest that love and belonging is in the third hierarchical tier of human needs. Love and belonging. We need it to survive. We need it for security and survival, and we need it because we're a social mammalian species. So if you create the amount of isolation and loneliness that the United States Protocol of Success, meaning everyone living in their own detached house, sitting around watching TV, and 1 in 7 being an addict and not learning any communication skills, if you create that protocol for hundreds of millions of people, you are going to find, surprise, surprise, that 78% of Americans regularly feel lonely. Loneliness is telling them there's a need for connection that they have, along with the rest of the species, that they're not meeting. Now, when you go to an American, and particularly online, and you say, I'm lonely, I'd like to meet someone to have really rich, meaningful conversations, they will avoid you. Why? Because we're dumb enough, even when we're trying to meet someone, to think that we don't want a needy person. Well, when everyone is a needy person, I think the real dumb thing is to say that we don't want someone who understands their own needs enough to articulate them. So, all I can say is that as a man, recognizing this, when I've felt needs and communicated them, I've been punished in Western culture. When I've pretended that I don't have any needs, I've been rewarded, which is a little bit of a strange and irritating phenomena. It's again something that I escape in Asia. In the Philippines, for example, need is completely understood, and they will try and help you solve your needs. So if you say, I'm lonely, in the Philippines, they'll say, you need someone. Yes, you need someone. Let's see, I'll call my sister, my this, because they actually want to help you meet your needs. You come to the US, and it's, you're needy, get the fuck out of here. Because we don't acknowledge the basic underlying physics of human need. So we're going to punish you for having the good sense of doing so. The point is, I've always found great relationship growth with someone who is needy and accepting of their needs. Someone who's needy is motivated, number one. Number two, they're conscious. Everyone has needs, and they can talk about them. And number three, when someone is motivated and conscious and can talk about their needs, I can meet them, and I do. Someone says, I need this and this and this. I say, how can I help? And I meet those needs. It brings us together. It makes a stronger relationship. So, need is not the enemy in my experience of relationship. People who are attached to pretending that they don't have needs are the enemy of strong, healthy relationships. And going back to that garbage pit analogy, if you're convinced that you don't have needs, what I would say is that within the psyche, there are thousands of unique identification, packets called personas. And some of them are completely unneedy because you haven't cut off their oxygen. And then there are other personas that are totally needy because you've never fed them, and because this culture has never fed them, and because they're desperate for food. Now, if you'll go into those desperate, needy parts and flood them with food, you want importance? Okay. Like I had a girlfriend, we'd have pity parties because it's also very unpopular to have self-pity in America, but everyone feels it. So we would have pity parties. And, if I felt self-pity, I'd say, Francine, woe is me. I went outside, I tried to start my car, the neighbor walked by right at that moment. Doesn't the neighbor understand I'm in a hurry? And Francine would say, poor you, these idiotic neighbors ruining your day. And I'd say, you're right. And then I drove forward, and then the garbage truck was right in the way, again, ruining my arrival on time. And she's like, yes, it's terrible. Those garbage trucks just out to get us. And it starts to be fun, and then you go to the next thing. Then I got the red light, of course, went just a thing because someone was jaywalking. Those fucking bastards. Yes, those bastards, You get into it, and pretty soon you got it all off your chest, and you're laughing, and it's fun. Meanwhile, you say, around the spiritual critics, you say, oh, it's so irritating, all the things getting in my way today. And they're like, what? I thought you were more spiritual than this. Why aren't you appreciating the fact that you're a successful white business male with privilege and this and that and the other? Why aren't you doing this? Like, well, I don't know why I wasn't doing all that. I was just frustrated that all these things kept coming up. But gee, I must be a bad person. So you've got all this supposed judgelessness coming in to attack these energies. And if you can just express them and welcome them. Welcome need, welcome self-pity, welcome fear, welcome shame. Tell me all about it. Let's make some time for this. You want to feel important? Okay, you're feeling unimportant. So let me appreciate you for everything you'd like to be appreciated for. Well, I want to be appreciated for getting out of bed this morning. Okay, I appreciate you for getting out of bed this morning. In fact, I appreciate you for getting out of bed for 10,000 days in a row. Every single day you've gotten out of bed. It's amazing, and then it's like, yes, it is amazing, isn't it? No one's appreciating this. And then, what about this? And you brushed your teeth 10,000 times as well in the morning and the evening? Amazing. So, give people what they want, particularly if they'll drink it in and enjoy it. It's fun. It's a tremendous amount of fun. We move into, this, well, I think we've already talked about this bottleneck of the individual rather than looking at things as an ecology. Because think about, for example, need in an ecological term. For me to feel deprived of spontaneous quality time in my own country means that I've had to have more than 1,000 interactions with Americans, none of whom called up and said, hey, I'd love to have a spontaneous, open-ended conversation. So 1,000 Americans all had to not do that. And why didn't they do it? Well, of course, they were following the cultural script that says it's uncool to show interest. It's uncool to have needs. It's uncool to have time on your hands. It's very cool to be busy. So they're all following the cultural script. So not a single person makes that invitation. So then, okay, so it's up to me. I've got to make that invitation. So I call this person, or I call this person. And when it gets to 15 to 20 to 30 to 1, when you have to call 30 people before one person, says, let's do it. That's the best thing. And 5 of them are like, oh God, not today, not today. I'm just scrambling. I'll call you later. And then you hang around by the phone, then they don't call, and then they have to come up with their excuses about why they're doing that. So, when it takes 30 calls to get one, that's what it takes to make me needy for high quality emotional interaction of a spontaneous nature, of a feminine nature. See, spontaneity is feminine. Structured is masculine. Call me next week and we'll pencil you in, and I'll fit you in my lunch window for 20 minutes is about one of the most masculine things you can possibly do. Oh, I feel it. Let's do that now. That's feminine. We're in a masculine world. But that very masculinity dominating the cultural infrastructure makes it incredibly unhealthy, when the healthiest culture is a balance of masculine and feminine. So since I can't find that in my own culture, I fly halfway around the world and I find it in abundance. It's just an absolute delight. And I felt it from the first hour I sat down in Thailand 10 years ago to the present day. An absolute delight. No fighting. There is a feast laid out. A feast. And of course, I don't feel needy in Thailand because all my needs are met in abundance. I feel needy in my own country because I'm shamed for even acknowledging that they exist, let alone supposing that I might be able to meet them in polite society. So we have ecological thinking says, don't shame yourself for not being happy in the environment that you're in. If there is another environment, go to a place where, for example, if you like tropical fruits, go to a place where there's an orchard of tropical fruits and you will have an abundance, and suddenly you'll feel completely abundant in that area. Now, another thing is don't be childish. And there's an idea that there's this conflict between maturity and childish. So I have Americans right and left apologizing to me for crying because it's more feminine to cry than it is not to cry. And so in a chauvinistic culture, just crying means somehow that they lost control of their suppression of their feelings. So I'm apologized to when women cry around me. I'm apologized to for when women have needs. Like, oh, I hope you don't think I'm dumb, but I really need this kind of tea in the morning and stuff. And it's like, please don't judge me for that. So there's all this, this tension. And it's like, and I want to be mature. And then some people will put on performances for me, like, oh, I don't need anything. I'm not one of those clingy women. I'm very mature and I understand how men are. And it's usually, I understand that men are misogynistic, dishonest sex addicts. And so I know I'm a woman of the world, so I'm expecting that. And I'm not one of those clingy women who are disturbed by that. But the truth is that there is a very strong connection between understanding, nurturing, loving, and accepting our inner children and healing their traumas and being in the present as a mature adult. And then the other thing is there's a correlation between the vitality of adulthood and the degree to which we love and accept and embrace the playfulness and the innocence of the child. When you have an adult that honors feminine energy, meaning the deeper the feeling, the more they take notice, the greater the wonder, the more present they are in response. The greater the innocence, the more they protect that innocence. When you have a dynamic where the adult protects the child rather than preys on the child and uses the child, you create a very wonderful experience of a healthy child growing into a healthy adult. And since many of us didn't get that, one of the most mature things we possibly can do is to go back and love that child and embrace it. And it's something I'm very, very grateful to my wife for. Because being from another culture, a Filipino, she has never been ashamed to have needs. And she's never shamed me for having needs. Can you imagine how big that is? She's never been ashamed to have needs or feelings, and she's never shamed me for having needs and feelings. And the amount of fear that lifts off creates a place where we participate deeply. We participate deeply in a partnering relationship that's just phenomenal. And I consider her to be more mature than most people who are making such an effort to suppress their childlike qualities. And I also notice the fluidity in my own life where I may be being a 2-year-old with my dog rolling around on the floor and playing and exercising and moving my body and getting it into a state of delight and ease and simple acceptance. And that gives me the energy to then make something like this video, which otherwise I wouldn't have. And so it's an embrace of the full self. And the adult is a synergy of the child, the adolescent, the young adult, and something more. It's a synergy. If you suppress the one, you don't get the fullness of the other. Now, you create your own reality is something that I heard a lot from the channel Lazarus growing up. I started working with Lazarus when I was 12 years old, and it was very tough because, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, when I was busy doing all my processing and programming and reality creation, my parents were getting a divorce. I wanted to kill myself. My siblings were being abused. And none of these meditations seemed to create a cessation in that pain. And it would go back to something that I think that everything is true from one perspective. So pick the truth that works. Pick the truth that is intelligent, the truth that creates more units of well-being per energy invested. And so it wasn't sitting and meditating in my room about reality creation or writing in my journal that helped my pain. It was finding a friend outside the house at age 17 and saying, I want to move in with you. I can't go on living in this household. As soon as I moved in there, a lot of that trauma subsided. And so, that's a very lineal way to approach it. It's not about talking about your beliefs and this and that and the other, and just sitting there meditating. It's getting out and doing something. And so, I'm skeptical of any truth, and I'm open to any truth, aware that it can be used as a way to hide and not take action, and it can be used to empower and take action. We then have control versus surrender. Now, the first thing to clarify is that if you are trying to surrender, let's say surrender to love or the universe, you are controlling yourself and your intentions. When you say, I want to surrender, what you're saying is I'm not surrendering naturally in my flow, but I want to. So I'm going to try and control my thoughts and my feelings and my body until I fit the profile of surrender. Because if you surrender to surrender and you're controlling, then you surrender to the control. If you say, gee, I'm a really controlling person, you say surrender to that. Surrender, that's part of the universe. I am part of the universe. Control is part of the universe. I surrender to that. And it just gets to again, the awareness of the paradox. The person who's the most active spiritual critic. You're not being positive enough. You're not being positive. Well, how positive is it to go around telling people they're not positive? I made some critical comments to an ex-lover recently that I thought might help her because she was very good at seeing how great she was. She wasn't very good about seeing how shitty she was. And she was both. She was great and shitty, like most of us. And so, since she wouldn't embrace the shittiness, that seemed like the most healthy thing to talk about, the thing that she wouldn't naturally go towards. Because what good are you unless you bring something new that the person can't do on their own? If someone's got 5 hammers, you don't show up with a hammer, you show up with some nails. You show up with the thing they don't have because that's going to bring balance and symmetry and, move things forward. So I praised her, but I included some things that I thought, were very destructive. And her response was, I focus on the positive and and that she thought I ought to be focusing on the positive like she was. Well, of course, that's criticism. She also was telling me how grateful she was and how she focused on what she was grateful about, and that I ought to be focusing on what was grateful about to her. But I noticed she wasn't grateful for any of my comments. She wasn't grateful for the emails. She wasn't grateful for the whole thing. So it's like, well, you can't believe in gratitude that much if you're able to take a whole hour of my time and not be grateful for a single moment of it. So you pay attention to people's behavior more than what they're spouting as a general rule, because people do what they actually believe, not what they say they believe. And on the thing of control and surrender, think of like driving a car. Do you want someone that just lets go of the wheel and just crashes into other wheel? So if you, again, say people do what they believe, if you believe that the universe has a plan, just let go of the wheel, let go of the accelerator, let go of eating, let go of anything, and wherever the universe takes you, that's your plan. But of course you don't believe that. This tends to be thrown in when people fail. People tried to steer the car left and they failed, and so they got in an accident. And they tried to save up enough money, but they failed, so they went bankrupt. And they tried to do this, so they tried to control, they failed, and then they said, the universe must have a plan. Well, if the universe had a plan, of complete surrender, then just stop eating and doing anything, and the universe will take care of you. Just completely surrender. So there's a lot of, just BS in that terrain. And in general, one of the most important things to control is the control protocol. So for example, you have highly productive people scheduling their times very, very thickly, but a lot of that time is not spent on cultural analysis and value hierarchy analysis. And so when you have so many people expending great deals of time, money, and energy to be mediocrely happy when they pause and notice how they're feeling in their heart, mind, and body, the real thing would be to control that time to maybe allow an hour a week to analyze what's creating the biggest pain and what's creating the biggest joy and happiness. And compare that with multiple other things that could be done and look at choices so that there's more proactivity, in Stephen Covey's words, sharpening the saw, the seventh habit of highly effective people, to sharpen the saw, to look at that core analysis. Another thing is that religion is bad because they lied about this, because they killed these indigenous tribes, because it's complete BS. So religion is bad. It's a little bit like this scenario where the whole free love and free sex thing. It's important to understand that having ritual is part of a balanced life. Ritual is the right brain, the unconscious mind. So if you throw out religion in order to get rid of all the stupidity, where's your ritual going to come from, for one? Two, religions are a social phenomena. My sister, who's joined a religious cult, she got a car for $1. She was very popular. And she was pretty and blonde, and so they loved having her as a spokesperson because she wasn't fitting the stodgy, Christian thing. And so I had to hand it to her. I mean, nobody's giving me a car for $1. Nobody's showing up to honor me because I make a video like this. So she's created a powerful business and social network that I, with all my esoteric ideas, don't have. And so that's a benefit. So you've got ritual, you've got social networking, you've also got the discipline of routine that calms people down, and you've got the contemplation of something that's more important than human. You've got 4 things that are really good about religion. And then you've got all the shit in there. Well, if you're going to throw away all that shit, it's like, could we please stop having another war in the name of peace or whatever it is? Well, how are you going to create ritual, social connection, transcendence, and business connections and any other of those parts? How are you going to do that? And not just fall into the category of I'm superior because, we all know that, two species couldn't have fit on an ark. How dumb do you have to be? The lion would have eaten the lamb and that thing. That's not true, and that's not true, and why didn't they do this? And you throw all that out. Fair enough, perfectly reasonable. But where's your ritual? Where's your quality time? Where's your sense of community? What about disaster relief? Again, a strong thing in many Christian sects. They'll put the pan around if your sister can't pay their medical bills. So what about all that? Where does that come? Because in New Age communities, it usually deteriorates into my New Age guru is better than yours. So there's very little community around that. And so, that's look at both sides. I'm really glad my sister found her Christian cult, because none of my spiritual cults would have done for her what her Christian cult did. And that's not meaningless. It's not meaningless to take a young woman and have her feel safe in her security, survival, a sense of love and belonging, and a sense of self-esteem. I mean, that's incredibly valuable. Now we go into a last little bit here. Forgiveness is something that I've had pushed at me anytime I talk about anything bad. Oh, just forgive. Now, one of the things that I've learned about trauma is that when you don't deal with trauma as a child, you dissociate. That's taking an energy field and partitioning it, putting it in a box and then stopping feeling it, like walking away from that garbage dump. Well, forgiveness is a process of releasing the charge and the energy. You can't release the charge of the energy of something that's in a box. You can't release the box until you're capable of feeling it, which means you've actually got to go back to where you put it in that partitioned part of the psyche. You actually have to welcome it back. You have to say, yes, I know at 5 years old and at 8 years old and at 20 years old, I shoved all this feeling out there and I told you I never want to see you again and I hate you and I banished you and I've spent my whole life running from you, but now I want you to come back. Now I want to invite you out of the shadow that I put you in. I want to own you as part of me. I want to feel the grief and the rage and the hurt and the envy and the sadness. I want to learn from each of those feelings what they tell me about my reality, my beliefs, what's going on for me at those different ages. I want to care for those ages and learn from them, and I want to apologize to them for shoving them off. And now I can release some of that energy. Now I can forgive because it's a part of me. Well, in a trauma-illiterate culture, you can't technically forgive because what you're trying to release is in a box that you put there with seals saying, I never want to see you again. And you put it there for good reason, because you had a glowering, drunken father over you that says, if you ever say that again, I'm going to kill you. So you say, okay, who said that in there? You were the one telling the truth? Okay, get the fuck out of here. You're going to kill me. So I don't want any truth-telling around here. Get the fuck out. Well, that part went to keep you alive. And now you're here saying, why am I stuck? And it can't speak because you told it to keep you alive by never talking to you again, by never honoring it. You did that to stay alive. Back in the ecological framework, not because anything that was wrong with you, because something was very wrong in your environment, because the people who should have been protecting you were preying on you, physically, emotionally, sexually, in any other way. They were preying on you rather than keeping you alive. That's wrong. That devolves. It moves towards evil. It's going backwards. The old eating the young as opposed to the young growing out of the old. It's the deepest tension between good and evil, between life and death. So to that thing, if you can't forgive, if you have stuck energy, do the work with trauma. There's a great book here called The Body Keeps the Score. I have a whole website, understandtrauma.com, because it's such a big topic. And if you can't forgive, it means you haven't integrated all of your love and all of your hate and all of your fear in those traumatized pockets. So good luck, and thank you for taking a step deeper into a more complex, a more interesting and paradoxical world.